Hypothermia is not the gentle sleep they promise in movies. It is a monster that breaks your will. When my husband bolted the heavy oak door and left me to the Montana blizzard, he believed the cold would bury his secrets. He was wrong. The cold preserves everything, including rage. He did not see the pair of eyes watching from the tree line, eyes belonging to a woman who would help me burn his entire world to the ground. My name is Maxine Corbett, and I was 32 years old the night my husband decided I was worth more dead than alive. It was not a decision made in a fit of passion or a moment of accidental rage. It was a cold calculation, balanced on a ledger only he could see, executed with the same corporate efficiency he used to run Apex Horizon. We were in Montana, supposedly to save a marriage that had been eroding for 2 years. But as I sat in the high-ceilinged living room of the rental lodge, staring into the roaring fire, I felt less like a wife and more like an asset being liquidated. The lodge was a masterpiece of rustic pretension, the kind of place that cost $5,000 a night to feel like a pioneer, provided that pioneer had heated floors and a wine cellar. Outside, the world was ending. A blizzard had been hammering the mountains since noon, burying the access roads under 3 feet of snow and turning the evergreen forest into a graveyard of white skeletons. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of pine and the expensive cologne Richard wore like armor. Richard was 40 years old, a man who had built a virtual real estate empire on charisma and vaporware. He stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir, looking every inch the concerned patriarch. He was handsome in that sharp, manufactured way that looks good on magazine covers, but feels cold to the touch. And then there was Elena. Elena was 26, beautiful in a way that made other women feel invisible, and she was ostensibly here to handle Richard's urgent communications during our retreat. It was an insult I had been too tired to fight. She sat on the leather sofa opposite me, her laptop open, typing with a rhythm that felt like a countdown. "You look tired, Max," Richard said, his voice dripping with that patronizing sweetness he had perfected lately. "Maybe the altitude is getting to you, or is it the medication again?" I blinked, trying to clear the fog that had descended over my brain shortly after dinner. "I didn't take any medication. Richard, I just had the soup." "You have been forgetful lately, darling," he sighed, glancing at Elena. They exchanged a look, a micro-expression of shared knowledge that vanished before I could fully process it. My limbs felt like lead. It was a heaviness that started in my stomach and radiated out to my fingertips. I tried to lift my water glass, but my grip was clumsy, and water sloshed onto the mahogany table. "See?" Elena said softly, closing her laptop. "She is not well, Mr. Corbett. Perhaps she should lie down." "I am fine," I slurred. The words sounded thick, foreign in my own mouth. I knew this sensation. It was not exhaustion. I had been drugged. The realization hit me with a jolt of panic that was immediately suffocated by the chemical lethargy dragging me down. "What did you put in the soup?" Richard's face hardened. "Don't start with the paranoia again. Maxine, we talked about this with Dr. Aris. This is exactly why we are here. I am not paranoid." I tried to stand, but my knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the table for support. "I am going to call my sister." "The lines are down. Max, the storm," Richard said calmly, taking a step toward me. "And there is no cell service. You know that." Then, chaos erupted. Elena stood up, ostensibly to help me, but as she reached my side, she stumbled. It was a clumsy, theatrical motion. She grabbed a piece of silverware from the tray that had not yet been cleared. In a blur of motion that my drugged eyes could barely follow, she grazed it lightly along her own forearm. It was a superficial scratch, but a red line appeared instantly, vivid against her pale skin. Elena screamed. It was a high, piercing sound that shattered the quiet of the lodge. "No, Maxine, stop it, please!" She threw herself backward, crashing into the coffee table, sending books and vases clattering to the floor. She held her injured arm, her eyes wide with a terror that looked terrifyingly real. "Richard, help!" She has the silverware! She is trying to hurt me! I stood there, swaying, my hands empty, my mind reeling. What? No, Richard was on me in a second. He did not look at my empty hands. He did not look at the knife lying on the floor next to Elena. He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging into my flesh with bruising force. "My God, Maxine!" he roared, shaking me. "What have you done? You have finally lost your mind." "I didn't touch her," I whispered, fighting the darkness closing in on my vision. "Richard, look, I am not holding anything." "You attacked her," Richard yelled, drowning out my weak protest. He looked over his shoulder at Elena, who was sobbing now, clutching her arm, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy commitment. "She is dangerous. Elena, get back. She is having one of her episodes." "I am scared." "Richard," Elena cried out. "She said she wanted me dead. Look at all this blood." "I have to protect us," Richard said, his voice shifting from anger to a chilling, resolved calm. He began to drag me toward the heavy oak front door. "No," I gasped, digging my heels into the thick Persian rug. "Richard, stop. It is a blizzard outside. You can't." "I can't keep a violent lunatic in the house with an injured woman," he grunted, hauling me across the floor. "You need to cool off. You need to understand what you have done." "Richard, please!" My scream was weak, barely more than a croak. "It is freezing. I will die out there." He ignored me. He wrestled me to the door, unlatched the heavy iron bolts, and kicked it open. The wind hit me like a physical blow. It was a wall of white noise and ice, screaming at 60 miles per hour. The temperature dropped instantly, sucking the warmth from the room. Snow swirled in, coating the entryway in seconds. Richard shoved me out onto the stone porch. I fell hard onto the ice, the cold biting through my thin cashmere sweater instantly. He grabbed a windbreaker from the coat rack, a thin nylon thing meant for autumn hiking, not a Montana blizzard, and threw it at me. "Go to the shed," he shouted over the roar of the wind. "Stay there until morning. I will call the police as soon as the storm breaks. If you try to come back inside, I will shoot you in self-defense. Do you understand? I have witnesses. Maxine, I have cause." "Richard!" I scrambled up, the wind nearly knocking me over again. "The shed is too far. Please." "Go." He slammed the door. The sound was final, like a coffin lid dropping. I heard the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding home. I stood there for a moment, stunned, the snow instantly plastering my hair to my skull. I pounded on the wood with my fists, screaming his name until my throat felt like it was bleeding. "Open the door! Richard, please!" Nothing happened. Desperate, I stumbled over to the large bay window to the right of the porch. The wind was so strong I had to cling to the stone siding of the house to keep from being blown off the terrace. I peered through the glass. Inside, the fire was still crackling warmly. The scene I saw froze my heart faster than the storm ever could. Richard was not calling for help. He was not pacing in distress. He was standing by the fireplace, holding Elena. Her injured arm was draped casually around his neck. The bandage forgotten. They were not two traumatized victims. They were lovers sharing a private joke. Then, Richard looked up. He looked straight at the window. He saw me. I expected to see anger, or fear, or even a flicker of guilt, but there was nothing. His eyes were empty, devoid of humanity. He looked at me with the cold, calculating detachment of a man checking a box on a to-do list. He knew exactly what he was doing. He raised his hand and slowly closed the heavy velvet curtains, shutting me out of his life, shutting me out of the warmth, shutting me out of the world of the living. I was alone. The reality of my situation crashed down on me. The shed he had mentioned was an old storage structure for snowmobiles. It was at least 500 meters away, down a winding path through the dense forest. And I knew, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that it would be locked. Richard was meticulous. He would never leave a variable to chance. He sent me to the shed because he knew I would waste my last reserves of energy trying to reach it. He wanted me to be found frozen to death halfway there, or curled up by the locked door of the shed. A tragic accident of a mentally unstable woman who wandered off into the storm. I checked the pockets of the thin windbreaker. Empty, no gloves, no hat. I was wearing indoor loafers, thin trousers, and a sweater. The cold was a living thing. It was predatory. Within 2 minutes, my violent shivering began. It was not just shaking, it was a convulsion that racked my entire body. My teeth chattered so hard I bit my tongue. The taste of copper filling my mouth. The temperature was dropping fast. It had to be minus 25 degrees, maybe colder with the wind chill. The snow was falling so heavily that I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. If I stayed on the porch, I would freeze. If I went to the shed, I would freeze. But a primal instinct kicked in, a refusal to die on his doormat like a discarded dog. I had to move. Movement generated heat. I turned away from the house, away from the lie of warmth, and stepped into the abyss. The wind pushed against me, trying to knock me down. The snow was knee-deep in places, soaking through my shoes and trousers instantly. My feet went numb within the first 100 yards. It felt like I was walking on stumps of wood. I tried to keep my head down, shielding my face with the thin collar of the jacket, but the wind whipped the snow into my eyes, blinding me. The crystals felt like ground glass against my skin. One step, another step. Just keep moving. Maxine. But the drug was still in my system, fighting with the adrenaline. My eyelids felt heavy. The cold was beginning to change. The pain in my fingers and toes was fading, replaced by a dull, throbbing absence of sensation. I had been walking for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The lodge was gone, swallowed by the whiteout. I had lost the path. I was in the trees now, the dark shapes of pines looming over me like judges. I stumbled over a buried root and fell face first into the snow. It was so soft, so quiet. The urge to just lie there was overwhelming. The snow felt like a blanket. The wind seemed to whisper that it was okay to rest. Just for a moment. Why fight? Richard had won. He had the money, the girl, the house. I was just a ghost causing trouble. No, the thought was small, but sharp. He wants this. He is betting on this. I tried to push myself up, but my arms wouldn't cooperate. My elbows sank into the powder. My vision was tunneling, the edges turning gray. The hallucination of warmth was starting, the final stage before the heart stops. I felt a strange, comfortable heat spreading through my chest. "Get up," I whispered to myself, but the words were snatched away by the wind. I was going to die here. 32 years of life, extinguished in a snowbank because I trusted the wrong man. I closed my eyes, the darkness of the forest merging with the darkness in my mind, and then I felt it. It wasn't the wind. It was firm, rough, real. A hand clamped over my mouth. My eyes flew open. I was at the edge of the tree line. Looming over me was a shadow darker than the night. The hand pressing against my face was calloused, filthy, the fingernails caked with grime and dried earth. It smelled of wood smoke and unwashed skin, a stark, pungent contrast to the sterile, expensive scent of Richard's world. I tried to scream, but the sound was muffled against the rough palm. "Shh," a voice hissed, close to my ear. It was a woman's voice, raspy like sandpaper dragging over stone. "Don't make a sound. Unless you want him to finish the job." I looked up, trying to focus through the snow and the fading consciousness. I couldn't see her face, only the wild tangle of gray hair whipping in the wind and a pair of eyes that caught the faint reflection of the snow, eyes that were fierce, alert, and terrifyingly alive. I stopped struggling. The cold was still killing me, but for the first time since the door slammed shut. I wasn't alone. The hand pulled me backward, dragging me into the deeper darkness of the woods, away from the path, away from the shed, and into the unknown. The woman did not speak again immediately. She moved with a strength that belied her emaciated frame, her grip on my arm like a vice made of iron and dirt. She dragged me through the snow, not away from the wind, but directly into a cluster of jagged rocks that broke the gale's fury. My legs were useless, trailing behind me like dead weights, scraping over buried roots and ice. We collapsed into a small, naturally formed alcove behind a massive boulder. The wind screamed overhead, but down here, the air was still enough to breathe without choking. I gasped, the freezing air burning my lungs. Panic was a frantic bird beating its wings against my ribcage. I scrambled backward, away from her, my back hitting the cold stone. "Who are you?" I stammered, my teeth chattering so violently I could barely articulate the words. "Let me go. I need to get to the road. I need to flag down a car." The woman crouched opposite me. Up close, even in the gloom, I could see the map of a hard life etched into her face. She looked to be about 55, though the weathering of her skin made her appear ancient. She wore layers of mismatched military surplus gear, a torn camouflage jacket over 3 wool sweaters, cargo pants that had been patched with duct tape, and heavy boots that looked 2 sizes too big. "The road," she repeated. Her voice was flat, devoid of the hysteria that was consuming me. "You think the road is safety. You think a car means rescue." "My husband tried to kill me," I managed to say, pushing myself up against the rock, trying to summon the strength to stand. "I need the police. The highway is just down the ridge. I saw the lights earlier." I tried to lunge past her, driven by a desperate, singular need to find authority, to find blue lights and sirens. She didn't tackle me. She simply extended a leg and tripped me. I fell hard into the snow, too weak to catch myself. Before I could rise, she was over me, not threateningly, but with the heavy, immovable presence of a boulder. "Stay down," she ordered, "unless you want a bullet in your back." "You're crazy," I sobbed, the tears freezing on my cheeks. "Let me go." "Listen to me," she hissed, grabbing the collar of Richard's thin windbreaker and yanking me close. Her eyes were hard, intelligent, and military sharp. "Richie Corbett didn't push you out here hoping you would survive long enough to hail a taxi. He called his friends, and his best friend in this county is Sheriff Miller." I froze. "Sheriff Miller? No, that is impossible. Police help people." The woman, Martha, though I did not know her name yet, scoffed. It was a dry, ugly sound. She reached into the deep pocket of her oversized jacket and pulled out a brick-sized object. It was a radio scanner, old and battered, wrapped in plastic bags to keep it dry. She twisted a dial with a gloved hand. Static hissed through the small speaker, cutting through the sound of the wind. Then, a voice broke through. It was distorted, but I recognized the casual, booming baritone. It was the sheriff. I had met him once at a charity gala Richard hosted. "Yeah, I am at the junction of Route 93. The sheriff's voice crackled. "Visibility is 0, Richard. But don't you worry. If she makes it to the blacktop, we will spot her. We are classifying this as a mental health crisis. Danger to self and others." There was a pause, and then Richard's voice came through. Clear and sickeningly calm. "I appreciate it. Jim, she was armed. She was ranting about demons. If you see her, do whatever you have to do to secure the situation. I don't want her hurting one of your deputies." "Understood," the sheriff replied. "We will neutralize the threat if she shows resistance. And in this weather, a body can get lost for a long time. Richard, even if we find her, nature might have done the job for us. We will just be the cleanup crew. Just make sure she doesn't talk to anyone. Jim, I am counting on you." "Consider the mess handled. Out." The radio clicked off. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow. My world, or what was left of it, fractured. The police were not coming to save me. They were coming to execute me. "Neutralize the threat," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "That is code for shoot to kill and plant a weapon later," Martha said, shoving the radio back into her pocket. "Or they will just drive you 10 miles deeper into the woods and toss you out of the cruiser. Either way, You don't survive the night if you go to that road. I stared at her, my mind reeling. How? How did you know? I have been watching them, Martha said. She reached into a thermos attached to her belt. I watch everyone who comes up to the High Ridge Lodge. But your husband and his little blonde pet? They were special. She unscrewed the cap of the thermos. Steam rose into the frigid air, smelling of pine needles and something sharp and medicinal. 2 days ago, Martha continued, pouring a dark liquid into the cap. Before you even arrived, I saw them on the terrace. The blonde one, Elena. She was practicing falling down. She would scream, throw herself on the ground, and then they would laugh. They rehearsed it. Lady, they rehearsed the whole damn play. The knife, the screaming, the door. It wasn't a fight. It was a script. My stomach turned over. The memory of Elena's clumsy fall. The way Richard was ready at the door before I even realized what was happening. It hadn't been an argument gone wrong. It was a trap set days in advance. I was never meant to leave Montana. Here, Martha shoved the cup at me. Drink, now. I can't, I said. My jaw locked tight. Drink it, or you die, she commanded. Your core temperature is dropping. Your brain is starting to shut down. This is willow bark, pine needle, and enough caffeine to jumpstart a heart. Drink. I took the cup with shaking hands. The liquid was scalding hot. I forced it down. It was bitter, vile stuff that tasted like dirt and resin. But as it hit my stomach, it felt like liquid fire. I gasped, the heat radiating outward, stinging my frozen extremities. Good, Martha said, capping the thermos. Now we move, and we don't go where they expect. Where? I asked, my voice slightly stronger. They think you will go downhill, toward the lights, toward the road, she said, standing up and scanning the tree line. So we go up, into the deep timber, into the teeth of the storm. I can't make it, I said, looking at the wall of black trees. I have no shoes, essentially. You can make it because the alternative is being a corpse in a snowbank, she said. She grabbed my arm again, hauling me to my feet. Move your feet. Stomp them. Keep the blood flowing. Follow my tracks exactly. I know where the sinkholes are. I know where the bears sleep. We began to walk. It was a march through hell. The wind was a physical weight, pushing us back, trying to scour us from the face of the mountain. Every step was a battle. My feet were numb blocks of ice, and I had to trust that they were still attached to my legs because I could no longer feel them hitting the ground. Martha was relentless. She did not slow down, but she did not leave me behind. She moved with a predatory grace, finding paths where I saw only impenetrable brush. She navigated by landmarks I couldn't see, a twisted branch here, a specific rock formation there. She was a ghost in this forest, and I was holding on to her shadow for dear life. We climbed for what felt like an hour. The altitude made the air thin and sharp. The trees grew denser, blocking out the little ambient light that reflected off the snow. Finally, we reached a sheer cliff face, hidden behind a thicket of spruce trees. Martha stopped and kicked away a pile of brush at the base of the rock. Beneath it was a rusted iron wheel, set into the stone. What is this? I breathed, leaning against a tree, my vision swimming. Insurance, Martha grunted. She grabbed the wheel with both hands and heaved. With a groan of metal on metal that sounded like a dying beast, a section of the rock face, a heavy steel door disguised with concrete and moss, swung inward. Warm, stale air rushed out to meet us. It smelled of oil, old paper, and dust. Get in, she said, pushing me into the darkness. She followed, pulling the heavy door shut behind us. The roar of the storm was instantly cut off, replaced by a ringing silence. Martha clicked on a flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a long concrete corridor. Cold War bunker, she explained, her voice echoing slightly. Rich survivalists built it in the 60s. Forgot about it in the 80s. I found it 5 years ago. Welcome to my estate. She led me down the hall into a main room. It was sparse but functional. There was a cot in the corner with a sleeping bag, a camping stove, stacks of canned food, and shelves lined with books and scavenged electronics. In the center was a wood-burning stove, already prepped with kindling. Martha lit the stove with a match. Within minutes, the fire was roaring. Casting dancing shadows on the concrete walls, I sank onto the cot, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving me trembling and hollow. The heat began to penetrate my clothes, and with the physical thawing came the mental thaw. The fog of the drug and the cold lifted, allowing the sharp, jagged edges of reality to slice into me. I looked around the bunker. This woman, who had nothing, had saved me. My husband, who had everything, had tried to discard me. Why? I asked, staring at the flames. Why did he do it? We have money. He didn't need to kill me to leave me. We signed a prenup. Martha was busy heating a can of soup on the stove. She didn't look at me. Did you? Yes, I said. Whatever I brought into the marriage remains mine. He knows that. And what happens if you die? Martha asked quietly. I paused. The legal jargon of the documents I had signed 5 years ago drifted back to me. If I die, he gets the spousal share, but the bulk of the estate goes to the charity trust until I am 35. Think harder, Martha said. Think about the dates. Think about what is happening next week. My breath hitched. My birthday. Next week is my 33rd birthday. And the realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Harder than the wind outside. The Corbett Family Trust. My father set it up. I gained full, unsupervised control of the principal amount when I turned 33. Before that, it was managed by trustees. And who has power of attorney if you are incapacitated or missing? Martha asked, stirring the soup. Richard, I whispered. I signed a medical proxy last month. He said it was just standard procedure because we were traveling more. Martha turned to face me. The firelight illuminated her scarred face. He didn't want a divorce, honey. A divorce gets him nothing but what is in his pocket. He wanted the whole pie. He needed you gone before that birthday. If you are missing, presumed dead, or committed to an asylum for violence. He steps in as your guardian. He controls the trust. I wrapped my arms around myself, rocking back and forth. It wasn't just tonight. It wasn't just a mistress. 5 years, I murmured. He spent 5 years playing the perfect husband. Every anniversary, every gift, every I love you. It was all just a waiting game. He was watching the clock. He is a businessman, Martha said, handing me the tin cup of soup. You were just an acquisition. He was waiting to mature. I looked down at the steaming tomato soup. The room was warm, but a new kind of cold was settling into my bones, a cold that no fire could touch. It was the absolute zero of hatred. He thinks I am dead, I said, my voice hardening. He thinks you are a frozen lump of meat, Martha agreed. He thinks he has won. I took a sip of the soup. It tasted like life. Then we are going to let him think that, until I am ready. Martha smiled then. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a wolf baring its teeth. Now you are talking. The fever came in waves, rolling over me like the tides of a boiling ocean. In the safety of the bunker, wrapped in wool blankets that smelled of mothballs and damp earth, I should have been shivering from the hypothermia. Instead, I was burning. My body was fighting the shock, but my mind was fighting a war on a different front. The barrier between the past and the present dissolved. I was no longer lying on a cot in a Cold War relic. I was back in the sprawling living room of our penthouse in Seattle, and I was watching my life disintegrate frame by frame. Memory is a cruel editor. It cuts out the warning signs when you are happy and splices them back in when you are broken, forcing you to watch the red flags you blithely ignored. I saw the Christmas party from 2 years ago. I was wearing a red silk dress, feeling vibrant, alive. Elena was there. She was just an intern then, standing in the corner, holding a tray of champagne flutes. I remembered walking past her and feeling a sudden splash of cold liquid on my back. I had spun around, shocked. Elena had looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, apologizing profusely, claiming I had bumped into her. I didn't move, I had told Richard later that night as I scrubbed the wine stain out of the silk. "You have been clumsy lately, Maxine," Richard had said, leaning against the bathroom doorframe, watching me with a look of mild pity. "You have been bumping into furniture all week. Maybe you need to get your eyes checked." I had believed him. I made an appointment with an optometrist the next day. My vision was perfect, but the seed was planted. I am clumsy. I am losing my spatial awareness. Then came the lost items. My grandmother's sapphire earrings. The keys to the safe deposit box. Important tax documents. They would vanish from where I swore I left them, only to reappear days later in places I never went. Inside Richard's golf bag. Buried in the pockets of my winter coats in July, or in the trash can in the guest bathroom. "You are under a lot of stress," Richard would say, his voice a soothing baritone balm. "Maybe you are doing things in your sleep. My mother did that before the dementia set in." Dementia. He had used that word so casually. I was 30 years old, and he was already painting a picture of cognitive decline. I tossed on the cot, a moan escaping my lips. Martha was there instantly, placing a cold, wet rag on my forehead. Her hands were rough, but her touch was surprisingly gentle. "Easy," she murmured. "The poison is working its way out. You need to sweat it out." "He made me think I was crazy," I whispered, the realization cutting through the fever haze like a scalpel. "Doctor. Aris. Doctor." Aris was my therapist. Richard had recommended him, highly recommended him, for the past year. I had been pouring my heart out to Dr. Aris about my anxiety, my memory lapses, my sudden flashes of irrational anger that, in hindsight, was entirely rational. I realized now, with sickening clarity, that Elena had not just been an assistant, she had been the architect of my medical file. She handled the billing. She sent over my incident reports that Richard dictated. "They built a paper trail," I said, my voice cracking. I tried to sit up, but the room spun. "Martha, they have been documenting a decline that didn't exist. 2 years of notes saying I was unstable. 2 years of Richard calling doctor. Aris with concerns about my violent outbursts. That is why he wasn't afraid of the police. He has a stack of medical records signed by a licensed psychiatrist stating that Maxine Corbett is a danger to herself and others. Standard operating procedure for a hostile takeover," Martha said dryly from her seat by the monitors. "Discredit the witness before she even knows she is on the stand." "The power of attorney," I gasped, the memory hitting me like a physical blow. It was a Tuesday morning, barely a month ago. The sun was shining through the breakfast nook window. Richard had pushed a stack of papers across the granite island along with my latte. "Just standard updates for the trust, darling," he had said, not looking up from his tablet. "And a medical proxy. Since we are going skiing in the Alps next winter, legal says we need to be able to make decisions for each other if one of us ends up in a coma. I signed one for you, too." I had signed it. I hadn't even read the fine print. I signed my life away between a sip of coffee and a bite of toast. "I gave him permission," I said, tears hot and angry tracking down my temples. "I gave him the legal right to commit me. If I am found alive, he sends me to a facility. If I am found dead, he controls the body and the funeral. And next week is the payday," Martha finished for me. "My 33rd birthday," I said. "The restrictions on the Corbett Family Trust lift. $150 million in liquid assets and real estate holdings. If I am incapacitated, my guardian takes control. If I am missing, the trustee with power of attorney takes control." Richard wasn't just a murderer. He was a thief who had spent 5 years picking the lock of my life. "Come look at this." Martha's voice was sharp, cutting through my self-pity. She gestured to the bank of monitors set up on a makeshift desk of cinder blocks and plywood. I forced my legs to work, stumbling over to her. The screens were black and white, showing grainy feeds from what looked like game cameras, the kind hunters used to track deer. They were positioned at various angles around the forest surrounding the lodge. "This is a live feed," Martha explained, pointing to the center screen. "Infrared." I squinted at the image. The forest was a wash of gray and black, trees standing like ghosts, but in the center of the frame, there was a bright white spot, a heat signature. It was moving. "Is that a person?" I asked. "No," Martha said grimly. "That is too small to be a person, and it is flying." She tapped a few keys on a battered laptop connected to the system. The image zoomed in. It was a drone, a high-end, military-grade thermal imaging drone. "He is hunting," Martha said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He is not sitting by the fire mourning his wife. He is flying a grid pattern over the forest. He is looking for your body heat. He wants to make sure you are dead before the sun comes up." I watched the drone buzz silently on the screen. It was mechanical, heartless, and efficient, just like Richard. He wasn't leaving my death to chance. He was auditing it. "He won't find us down here," Martha said. "The concrete and the earth shield our heat signature. To him, this patch of woods is just cold, dead ground." I looked at Martha. I really looked at her. In the harsh light of the monitors, I saw the intelligence in her eyes, the way her hands moved over the keyboard with practiced familiarity. This was not the skill set of a woman who had simply fallen through the cracks of society. This was training. "You are not just a squatter," I said. "You know how to splice into police frequencies. You have a surveillance network. You know how to jam signals. Who are you? Martha?" Martha leaned back in her chair, the rusty springs squeaking. She pulled a pack of cigarettes from her pocket, tapped one out, but didn't light it. She just rolled it between her fingers. "I used to be an engineer," she said quietly. "Civil engineer. I specialized in structural integrity for high-rise buildings. 10 years ago, I was the lead on the Skyline project in Chicago." My blood ran cold. That was an Apex Horizon project. My father's company. "Your father was a good man," Martha said. "But he was sick then. He let his son run the show. Richard cut corners. He used substandard steel to save $3 million. I found out. I refused to sign off on the safety inspections." She finally lit the cigarette, the flame illuminating the deep scars around her mouth. "Richard didn't fire me," she continued, exhaling a plume of blue smoke. "That would have raised flags. Instead, he planted $500,000 in an offshore account in my name. Then he tipped off the FBI. He framed me for embezzlement and corporate espionage. He said I was taking bribes to approve faulty plans." I stared at her, horror dawning on me. I remembered the scandal. It was vague. Headlines about a rogue engineer endangering lives. Richard had played the hero, claiming he had caught the corruption just in time to save the building. "I did 4 years in federal prison," Martha said, her voice hard as granite. "When I got out, I was blacklisted. My license was revoked. My husband left me and took our daughter. I lost everything. I came out here to die, originally, but then I saw him buying land up here. I saw him building that lodge. So I stayed. I waited." "You have been waiting 10 years, I whispered. "I learned patience in a cell," she said. "I knew a man like that doesn't stop being a monster. I knew eventually he would hurt someone else. I just needed to be there when he did." She turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine. There was a fierce, terrifying solidarity in her gaze. "We are the same. You and I," Martha said. "He took my life with a lie. He tried to take yours with a push. He thinks we are garbage. He thinks we are disposable." I looked back at the screen. The drone was still circling, a vulture made of plastic and circuitry. Richard was up there, warm and safe, drinking my wine, holding his mistress. Thinking he had won, he thought he had erased me, and in a way, he had. The Maxine, who worried about flower arrangements for the gala, was dead. The Maxine who second-guessed her own sanity because her husband told her to was frozen in the snow. The Maxine who signed papers without reading them had ceased to exist the moment that door locked. I felt the fever break. The heat that had been consuming me turned inward, coalescing into a hard, cold knot in the center of my chest. It wasn't rage. Rage is hot and messy. This was clarity. "He wants a body," I said, my voice steady for the first time in hours. "He wants closure," Martha corrected. "No." I stood up. My legs were weak, but I forced them to hold my weight. I walked over to the mirror hanging above the small sink in the corner. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Her hair was matted with ice and dirt. Her skin was pale and bruised. Her eyes were dark, hollow, and dangerous. She looked like a creature that had crawled out of a grave because the afterlife refused to take her. "He wants to confirm his asset is liquidated," I said, touching the cold glass. "So let's give him a ghost. If he wants to play games with reality, let's show him what a real nightmare looks like." I turned to Martha. "I am dead tonight. Martha, Maxine Corbett died in the blizzard." Martha crushed her cigarette out on the concrete floor. A slow, grim smile spread across her face. "Then who is standing in front of me?" she asked. "The executioner," I replied. The morning sun broke over the ridge with a brilliance that felt like an insult. The storm had passed, leaving the world scoured clean and buried under 4 feet of fresh, blinding white snow. Inside the bunker, the air was still and heavy with the scent of wood smoke. But on the grainy monitors, the world above was a flurry of performative activity. I sat on a crate, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, watching the sheriff's department conduct their search. It was a farce. A coordinated piece of theater designed for an audience of one, the eventual insurance adjusters. I watched Sheriff Miller direct his deputies away from the dense timber where Martha had led me, pointing them instead toward the treacherous ravine on the south side of the property. They were not looking for a survivor. They were looking for a spot where a body could conceivably vanish until the spring thaw. Richard stood on the porch of the lodge, wearing a heavy parka that looked brand new. He was speaking to a deputy, his posture slumped in a perfect imitation of a devastated husband. Elena stood a few feet behind him, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. From this distance, and through the low resolution of the camera feed, they looked like the victims of a terrible tragedy. "They are not even trying," I said, my voice rasping in the quiet room. "Of course not," Martha replied, sharpening a hunting knife on a whetstone. The rhythmic shk shk sound was the only other noise in the bunker. "Miller knows the script. If they find you alive, it complicates the paperwork. If they find you dead, it is a lot of reporting. If they don't find you at all, that is just nature doing its thing, open and shut." I turned away from the screen. The anger that had fueled me through the night had cooled into something solid and sharp. Like a blade of ice, I needed to stop watching them and start destroying them. But first, Maxine Corbett, the socialite with the perfect blowout and the designer wardrobe, had to die. "I need your scissors," I said. Martha paused, looking up from her knife. She studied me for a long moment, then reached into a tin box on the shelf and tossed me a pair of heavy shears, the kind used for cutting fabric or leather. I walked to the small, cracked mirror above the sink. The woman in the reflection was already halfway to being a stranger. My hair, my husband's pride and joy. The golden blonde mane he insisted I keep long because it looked regal at galas, was matted and frozen. I did not hesitate. I grabbed a handful of hair at the nape of my neck and squeezed the shears. The sound of the blade slicing through the strands was satisfying. A dry crunch that severed more than just keratin. I cut it all off. I hacked away the vanity, the expectations, and the weight of being Richard's trophy. When I was done, my hair was a jagged, uneven crop that barely covered my ears. Martha handed me a bowl of black paste. "Charcoal dust and walnut hull," she said. "It will stain your skin if you are not careful. It won't wash out for weeks." "Good," I said. I applied the mixture. The blonde disappeared, replaced by a harsh, matte black that made my pale skin look stark, almost ghostly. I washed my face, scrubbing away the last of the high-end moisturizer and the dirt of the forest. When I looked back in the mirror, Maxine was gone. A gaunt, dark-haired woman with eyes like flint stared back. I looked like a shadow. I looked like one of the invisible people Richard stepped over on the street without a second glance. Martha tossed a bundle of clothes onto the cot. "Put these on, my old fatigues and a spare thermal. You burn those cashmere rags in the stove. We don't leave DNA." As I dressed in the oversized, rough clothing, Martha moved to the radio setup. "I have put the word out," she said. "The network is active." "The network?" I asked, lacing up a pair of boots that were a size too big but warm. "The Invisible Army," Martha said, a note of pride in her voice. "There are homeless camps all along the highway, down in the valley, and behind the strip malls in town. People see us, but they don't see us. We are part of the scenery. A beggar on the corner sees who goes into the bank. A woman collecting cans sees who is meeting who in the motel parking lot. My people know Richard's car. They know Elena's face. Nothing they do from this moment on will go unnoticed." I nodded. It was brilliant. Richard lived in a world of surveillance cameras and digital footprints, but he had no defense against the analog eyes of the people he despised. "Now," I said, cracking my knuckles. "I need to get into his head. I need a computer." Martha pointed to a heavy, battered laptop sitting on a stack of magazines. "It is a brick. Found it in a dumpster behind an office park 2 years ago. Replaced the hard drive. Loaded a Linux distribution on it. It is slow, and it only connects through a satellite uplink I jury-rigged. But it works." I sat down in front of the machine. The plastic was cracked, and the keys were worn smooth. But as I placed my fingers on the keyboard, a dormant part of my brain lit up. Richard loved to tell people I was a philanthropist or an estate manager. He conveniently forgot, or perhaps chose to ignore, that before I was Mrs. Corbett, I was Maxine Vance, a senior systems analyst for a cybersecurity firm. I had spent 6 years finding holes in corporate networks before I met Richard and let him convince me that my job was too stressful and that I should focus on our future. I hadn't touched a command line in 5 years, but it is like riding a bicycle, or perhaps more accurately, like loading a gun. The satellite connection was sluggish, but steady. I didn't try to hack Apex Horizon's main server. That would trigger alarms. Instead, I went for the soft underbelly, Richard's personal cloud account. He was arrogant. That was his vulnerability. He believed he was the smartest man in any room. I typed in his email address. For the password, I didn't even have to use a brute force program. I knew him. I tried Apex King 1. Incorrect. I tried Money Never Sleeps. Incorrect. I tried Elena Forever. Incorrect. I paused. I thought about the man who threw me into a blizzard. A man obsessed with his own legacy, his own image. I typed, Richard Corbett, 01. Access granted. I let out a short, bitter laugh. He was so narcissistically predictable. I began to dig. I bypassed the folders labeled Photos and Personal and went straight to the subdirectories hidden deep within his miscellaneous folder. I found a folder named simply Projected Cash Flow. I opened the spreadsheets. The numbers on the screen were staggering, but in the wrong direction. "Martha," I said, my eyes scanning the columns of red ink. "Come look at this." She leaned over my shoulder. "That is a lot of zeros." "Richard isn't just broke," I said, calculating the totals in my head. "He is underwater, deeply. Look at these transfers. Obsidian LLC, Red Dragon Holdings. These aren't vendors. These are shell companies for offshore gambling syndicates." I traced the transaction history. He lost $4 million in crypto speculation in the last 6 months alone. And here's sports betting. High stakes. Another $2 million gone. "He is bleeding out," Martha observed. "It gets worse," I said, opening a folder marked Urgent. "He borrowed from loan sharks, the kind who don't send demand letters. They send men with baseball bats. He owes $8 million to the Volkov organization in Chicago. The payment is due in full on the 15th of this month." 3 days after your birthday," Martha said. "The trust fund," I said, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "The Corbett Trust releases the principal to me on my 33rd birthday. $150 million. He doesn't just want the money for greed. He needs it to save his life. If he doesn't pay Volkov next week, he is a dead man. So he kills you to pay his bookie, Martha spat. Pathetic. Wait, I said. There is more. I minimized the financial records and opened his email archives. I searched for Elena. Hundreds of emails popped up. Most were mundane, but the earliest ones were interesting. They predated her employment at Apex Horizon. They were from a private investigator Richard had hired 3 years ago. Subject verification. Veronica Miller. I opened the attachment. A photo of Elena stared back at me, but the name on the driver's license was Veronica Miller. She is not a secretary, I murmured, reading the dossier. She is a grifter, professional con artist, arrest record in Florida for wire fraud, suspect in the disappearance of her first husband in Nevada 4 years ago. The body was never found. Richard didn't seduce her, Martha realized. She targeted him, or he found her, I corrected. He hired a predator. He knew exactly who she was. He needed someone capable of murder. He didn't just want a mistress. He wanted an accomplice who knew how to make a husband disappear. They are perfect for each other. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I had slept in the same house with 2 monsters, one who wanted my money and one who had likely killed before. Check the sent folder, Martha suggested. See what he has been doing since last night. I clicked on sent items. The most recent email was time-stamped 4 hours ago. It was addressed to our family lawyer, Arthur Sterling. Subject, tragic accident. Draft filing. Arthur, as we discussed, the situation here is dire. Maxine has wandered off in the storm during a manic episode. The sheriff is not hopeful. Please have the papers ready for the emergency guardianship and the presumption of death petition. We need to move fast to ensure the estate assets are frozen and protected under my management. I need access to the primary trust account by the 12th to cover funeral expenses and stabilize the company stocks. Funeral expenses, I scoffed. He means the payment to the mob. But it was the next email that made my blood run cold. It was to a contact named Wei Zhang at a conglomerate called Pacific Rim Capital. Subject, property transfer. Montana, Seattle. Mr. Zhang, the obstruction has been removed. We can proceed with the acquisition of the Corbett estate properties. I will have the deed authority within the week. The price stands at $45 million for both locations. Have the wire ready. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with rage. He sold it, I whispered. He sold my father's house. He sold the home I grew up in. He hasn't even buried me yet, and he has already sold the roof over my head to a foreign developer. The contract is contingent, Martha pointed out, tapping the screen. See here? Upon proof of title transfer, he can't sell it until you are legally dead or he has power of attorney. I leaned back in the chair, the creak of the plastic echoing in the silent bunker. The scope of the betrayal was absolute. There was not a single shred of affection or accident in any of this. It was a liquidation sale of my entire existence. He thinks he is on a timeline, I said softly. He thinks he has 10 days to get the death certificate, get the power of attorney, unlock the trust, pay the mob, and sell the houses. He is desperate, Martha said. Desperate men make mistakes, but he is also dangerous. He expects a body, I said, or he expects me to be found wandering and confused, so he can drug me into an asylum. He has accounted for every possibility except one. What is that? That I am neither dead nor crazy, I said, and that I know his passwords. I looked at the screen, at the digital empire he had built on lies. I could delete the files. I could send them to the FBI right now. But that wasn't enough. If he went to jail now, he might plea bargain. He might hide the money. Elena might slip away to find another victim. No, I wanted them destroyed. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in, just like I had felt in the storm. I am not going to leak this yet, I said, closing the laptop. Why not? Martha asked. This puts him away for life. Because he still has hope, I said. I want to take that away first. I want him to believe he has succeeded. I want him to stand in that lawyer's office, pen in hand, thinking he owns the world. And then I want to pull the rug out from under him when he has nowhere left to fall. So we wait? We wait, I said. Let him think I am buried under the snow. Let him lie to the press. Let him dig his hole deeper. When he tries to climb out, I will be the one standing at the top with the shovel. I stood up and walked over to the corner of the room where Martha kept her scavenged supplies. I picked up a heavy, dark coat that smelled of grease and rain. Is the network ready? I asked. They are waiting for orders, Martha said. Good, I said. Pulling the coat on, it swallowed my frame, hiding the woman I used to be. Tell them to watch the house. If Richard or Elena so much as sneezes, I want to know. And tell them to find me a way into the city. I have a funeral to attend. My own. 3 days later, I watched my husband weep on national television. It was a broadcast carried by every major network in the state, a special report, interrupting the mid-morning talk shows. We watched it on a portable television Martha had rigged up in the bunker. The reception grainy, the colors washed out, but the picture was clear enough. Richard stood at a podium adorned with the Apex Horizon logo, flanked by the sheriff and, sickeningly, Elena. He looked devastated. His suit was black, tailored to perfection, but he had forgone a tie, unbuttoning the top of his shirt to suggest a man too consumed by grief to care about propriety. He had dark circles under his eyes. Makeup, I knew, applied by the same stylist he used for his quarterly earnings calls. Maxine is the light of my life, Richard said, his voice cracking with a precision that would have made a Juilliard instructor weep with pride. To think of her out there, alone in the cold, it breaks me. I am begging anyone with information to come forward. There is a reward. I just want my wife home. He buried his face in his hands. On cue, Elena stepped forward. She was dressed in modest gray wool, a stark contrast to the flashy designer pieces she usually favored. She placed a comforting hand on Richard's back, her face a mask of supportive concern. To the world, she was the loyal executive assistant holding the grieving CEO together. To me, she looked like a vulture waiting for the carcass to stop twitching. Look at them, Martha said, spitting a sunflower seed shell onto the concrete floor. They should win an Emmy. I did not feel sad. I did not feel the sting of betrayal anymore. That part of me had frozen solid in the Montana woods. I sat with a notebook on my lap, a cheap ballpoint pen in my hand. Senator Hawkins just tweeted his prayers, I said, my voice flat. I wrote down the name, Senator Hawkins. And there, I pointed at the screen. That is Marcus Thorne, the bank president. He is standing in the back row nodding, and Lydia Vance, my own cousin. Look at her, trying to get into the camera frame behind the sheriff. I wrote their names down, Marcus Thorne, Lydia Vance. What is that list? Martha asked. The guest list for the reckoning, I replied, underlining Lydia's name so hard the paper tore. These are the people enabling him. They know Richard. They know our marriage was a sham. But they are betting on the winner. They are lining up to kiss the ring of the grieving widower because they smell money. Well, Martha said, standing up and dusting off her hands, if you want to crash the party, we better move. The van is leaving in 20 minutes. The memorial was being held that evening at our penthouse in the city. Richard had called it a prayer vigil for Maxine, a somber gathering for close friends and family to hold on to hope. In reality, it was a victory lap. Getting into the building was disturbingly easy. Martha's invisible army was not an exaggeration. The head of the janitorial services contract for the Pinnacle Tower was a man named Joe, a Vietnam vet who owed Martha a debt from a decade ago. He didn't ask questions. He just handed me a gray jumpsuit, a fake ID badge, and a rolling cart filled with cleaning supplies. Keep your head down, Joe had grunted. Rich folks don't look at the help. You could be a ghost for all they care. He was right. I entered the service elevator of my own building. smelling of bleach and industrial lavender. When the doors opened on the penthouse floor, the 45th floor, the crown jewel of the skyline, I stepped into a world I had designed. I had picked out the Italian marble floors. I had chosen the abstract sculptures in the foyer. Now, I was scrubbing invisible scuff marks off them while people I had known for 10 years walked past me without a glance. The atmosphere was not one of mourning. It was a cocktail party with the volume turned down. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres, caviar blinis, and truffle tartlets. The mourners held crystal tumblers of scotch, huddled in small groups. They weren't talking about me. I moved my cart slowly through the periphery, polishing brass railings, my ears straining. "It is a tragedy." "Of course," I heard Marcus Thorne say, swirling his drink. "But honestly, Maxine was always a bit fragile. Richard is handling it with incredible strength. And from a market perspective, this consolidation of assets makes Apex Horizon very attractive." "I heard he is selling the Montana property," another voice chimed in. "Smart move, too many bad memories. Get the liquidity and move on." "To the future," Marcus toasted quietly. I gripped the handle of my mop so hard my knuckles turned white under the rubber gloves. They were drinking to my death. They were toasting the rise of stock prices over my corpse. I pushed the cart toward the hallway leading to the master suite. This area was roped off, guarded by a private security detail, but I knew the blind spots. I knew that the security camera in the hallway had a 3-second lag if the motion sensor was triggered from the floor level, a flaw I had pointed out to Richard years ago, which he had dismissed as paranoia. I dropped a roll of paper towels. As I bent to retrieve it, I slid under the velvet rope and into the shadows of the corridor. I moved quickly to Richard's home office. The door was unlocked. He felt safe here. He felt invincible. I slipped inside and closed the door softly. The room smelled of leather and his expensive cigars. I went straight to his desk, underneath the mahogany surface, near the knee hole. I attached a small, black device Martha had given me. It was a listening bug. High fidelity, with a battery life of 48 hours. Then, voices approached. "I am telling you, Richard, it is not enough." It was Elena. Her voice was shrill, lacking the soothing, professional modulation she used in public. I dove into the narrow walk-in closet where Richard kept his safe and his golf clubs, pulling the door almost shut, leaving a sliver of a crack. Richard and Elena burst into the office. Richard looked flushed, his tie finally undone, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Elena was pacing, her face twisted in anger. "Keep your voice down," Richard hissed, slamming his drink onto the desk. "There are 50 people outside mourning my wife. Have some respect for the narrative." "Forget the narrative," Elena snapped. She pulled up the sleeve of her gray dress, revealing the bandage on her arm. "Look at this. I hurt myself. Richard, I actually left myself with a serious wound on my arm for this play. You said 50-50? That was the deal when it was just a divorce scam. But taking a life? Taking a life is a 60-40 split." "It wasn't a killing," Richard said, pouring himself another drink. "It was an unfortunate exposure to the elements caused by her own unstable state of mind." "Drop the nonsense," Elena said, advancing on him. "I was there. I watched you lock the door. I saw her face. I am an accessory to capital murder, Richard, and I am the one who doctored the medical files for 2 years. If I go down, you go down. I want 60% of the trust payout." Richard laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. "You are getting greedy. Veronica, be careful. Greedy girls end up like Maxine." "Is that a threat?" Elena stopped, her eyes narrowing. "It is a reality check." Richard sat down in his leather chair, rubbing his temples. "You get 50%, and you get to be the new Mrs. Corbett. That is the deal. Don't push me. I am under a lot of pressure. The sheriff is getting twitchy." "He better hold it together," Elena muttered. "And you better get that death certificate. The investors are asking questions." "I am handling it," Richard snapped. "My head is splitting. Where are my pills?" He opened the top drawer of his desk. I held my breath. "I left them in the bedroom," he grumbled, slamming the drawer shut. "Go fix your face. You look like a shrew. Go out there and be the supportive friend." Elena glared at him, then turned and stormed out. Richard finished his drink in one gulp and followed her, switching instantly from angry accomplice to grieving husband as he crossed the threshold. I waited 10 seconds, then slipped out of the closet. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I had the intel. 60-40, the alliance was fragile. It was based on greed and mutual destruction. All I had to do was apply a little pressure. I left the office and moved to the master bedroom. It was strange to be in this room. My perfume still lingered faintly in the air, but Elena's presence was already colonizing the space. Her coat was thrown over my chaise lounge. Her makeup bag was open on my vanity. I went to the ensuite bathroom. Richard's medicine cabinet was unlocked. He took anxiety medication, a strong benzodiazepine to help him sleep and keep his cool. I took the bottle labeled alprazolam. I emptied the pills into my pocket. Then, I reached into the hidden pouch of my jumpsuit and pulled out a handful of identical-looking pills Martha had prepared. They were not sedatives. They were a synthetic compound derived from ergotamine, mildly hallucinogenic, designed to induce paranoia, light sensitivity, and auditory distortions without causing total incapacitation. It wouldn't make him trip. It would just make the shadows in the corner of his eyes look like they were moving. It would make him hear whispers in the wind. I filled the bottle and placed it back on the shelf. "Sweet dreams, darling," I whispered. "Now for Elena." I walked over to the nightstand on her side of the bed, the side that used to be mine. She had already claimed it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring. It was a custom piece. A 5-carat flawless diamond set in platinum. Richard had given it to me 3 years ago as an apology for missing our anniversary. I had been wearing it the night of the blizzard, when I was in the bunker. I had taken it off. It was the only thing of value I had left, but it was also a shackle. Richard believed this ring was on my finger, buried under 5 feet of snow in a ravine in Montana. He had seen it on my hand when he shoved me out the door. I placed the ring precisely in the center of the silk pillow. The diamonds caught the light from the hallway, glittering with a cold, malevolent fire. It was impossible. It was a ghost story. When Elena came in here tonight to sleep in my bed, she would find it. And she would ask herself one terrifying question. How did the ring get from a dead woman's hand in Montana to a penthouse in Seattle? Did Richard go back and get it? Is he hiding the body? Is he keeping secrets from her? Or is someone else in the house? I smoothed the duvet cover, erasing my physical touch, leaving only the psychological balm. I slipped out of the bedroom, rejoining the hallway just as a caterer walked by. I lowered my head, pushing my cleaning cart with the weary resignation of a minimum wage worker. "Excuse me," the caterer said, brushing past me. "Sorry, sir," I mumbled. I made my way back to the service elevator. As the doors closed, shutting out the hum of the party, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. The party was just getting started, and I had just served the first course. The unraveling of Richard Corbett did not begin with a bang. It began with a shiver. From the safety of a cheap motel room on the outskirts of Seattle, where Martha and I had set up our temporary command center, I watched my husband disintegrate. The laptop screen glowed with the feed from inside the penthouse, a digital window into the hell I was constructing for him. It was a slow, meticulous dismantling of his reality, orchestrated with the precision of a symphonic conductor. The pills I had swapped were doing their work. They were a subtle poison, attacking the edges of his perception, but the chemical warfare was only the foundation. The real terror came from the house itself. Richard had always prided himself on his smart home. He loved the idea of total control at the touch of a button. He didn't realize that by connecting his lights, his thermostat, and his security system to a central server, he had handed me the keys to his asylum. It was 3 a.m. on the second night after the memorial. Richard was asleep in the master bedroom, tossing and turning, the chemicals in his blood likely painting vivid, disjointed nightmares behind his eyelids. Elena was in the guest room down the hall. The discovery of my diamond ring on her pillow had shattered their intimacy. She had locked her door. I typed a command into the terminal. System override. HVAC, Zone 1, master bedroom. Set target temperature, 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I watched the thermostat reading on my screen plummet. In the penthouse, the vents hissed open, pumping aggressively chilled air into the room. Then, I accessed the multi-room audio system. I didn't blast music. That would be too obvious. Instead, I uploaded a sound file I had recorded on my phone during that first night in the bunker. The low, mournful howl of the Montana wind tearing through the pine trees. I set the volume to barely audible, a subliminal frequency that would bleed into his dreams. On the screen, Richard stirred. He pulled the duvet up to his chin. Then he kicked it off. Then he pulled it back. He sat up, rubbing his face. I turned the volume up just a fraction. Whoosh! Whoosh! He froze. He looked toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but he stared at them as if he could see the blizzard raging outside. He swung his legs out of bed. I zoomed in on the camera feed. He was shivering. His breath was actually visible in the air of the luxury bedroom. A small puff of white vapor. "Maxine?" he whispered. The microphone picked it up clearly. He didn't sound angry. He sounded terrified. He stood up and walked to the bathroom. As he passed the full-length mirror, I triggered the smart lighting in the hallway to flicker. Just a millisecond strobe effect. Richard jumped back, crashing into the dresser. "Who is there?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Elena?" He grabbed a heavy brass statue from the nightstand and swung it at the empty air. The drugs were amplifying the shadows, turning the flicker of a light into movement. In his peripheral vision, he was seeing me. He was seeing the wife he had murdered standing in the corner, dripping with melted snow. The door to the bedroom burst open. Elena stood there, wrapped in a silk robe, looking furious and exhausted. "What is wrong with you?" she snapped. "You are screaming like a banshee." "She is here," Richard gasped, pointing at the corner. "I saw her. I saw her hair. She was standing right there." Elena looked at the empty corner, then back at him with pure venom. "Stop it. Just stop it. Richard, the ring was bad enough. Now this theatrical haunting? Do you think I am stupid?" "I am not acting," Richard yelled, his teeth chattering. "Can't you feel it? It is freezing in here. Listen to the wind." Elena hugged her arms. "It is a little chilly. The thermostat is probably broken. But there is no wind. Richard, it is a calm night. You are losing it." "I am not losing it. You are trying to gaslight me." "Me?" Elena laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "You are the one planting jewelry in my bed to make me think she is back. You are the one trying to scare me into taking a smaller cut. Well, it is not working. If you don't pull it together, Richard, I am walking. And if I walk, I talk." She slammed the door, leaving him alone in the freezing dark. I sat back in my chair, sipping lukewarm coffee. "Stage 1 complete," I said to Martha, who was cleaning a disassembled pistol on the other bed. "Don't get cocky," Martha warned, not looking up. "A scared animal bites. He's going to try to break out of the trap." "Let him try," I said. "The walls are already closing in." The next morning, the financial noose tightened. Martha had done her job well. The rumor in the underground gambling dens of Seattle was spreading like wildfire. Richard Corbett was liquidating his assets not to pay his debts, but to flee the country. At 10 o'clock, Richard received a package at his office. I knew this because I had hacked the security feed in his reception area. A courier delivered a small brown box. Richard opened it at his desk. Inside was a dead canary, an unsubtle message from the Volkov organization. Canary was slang for someone who talks to the feds, or someone who tries to fly away. Beneath the bird was a note. Full payment, 48 hours, or the bird isn't the only thing that stops singing. I saw Richard pale. He swept the box into his trash can, his hands shaking so badly he knocked over his coffee. He picked up his phone and dialed the lawyer. Arthur Sterling. "Arthur, where's the death certificate?" Richard barked into the phone. "I don't care about the waiting period. I have a buyer for the properties. I need that trust unlocked now." He listened for a moment, then slammed his fist on the desk. "Presumption of death isn't enough for the bank? They need a body? Fine. I will get them a damn body." He hung up and immediately dialed Elena. "Pack a bag," he ordered. "We are going back to Montana." "Why?" Elena's voice was tinny through the speakerphone. "Because I need to prove to the bank, and to you, and to my own sanity, that the bitch is dead." Richard snarled. "We are going to find her. I don't care if we have to dig up the whole mountain. I am not losing $40 million because of a paperwork error." I smiled. He was coming back to the killing ground. Martha stood up and holstered the pistol. "It is time. Is the dummy ready?" "It is ready," I said. "And so am I." We drove back to Montana in a beat-up pickup truck that belonged to one of Martha's contacts. We arrived 6 hours ahead of Richard. The weather had cleared, but the temperature was still brutal. We worked quickly. The location was perfect. A steep, treacherous drop-off about 2 miles from the lodge, near a ravine known as Devil's Throat. It was plausible that a wandering, hypothermic woman would have slipped and fallen here. The body was a masterpiece of macabre theater. It was a department store mannequin we had stolen from a dumpster behind a closing boutique. We had dressed it in the same clothes I had worn that night. The thin trousers, the single loafer, I had lost the other one in the snow, and the distinctive windbreaker Richard had thrown at me. We positioned it on a ledge about 20 feet down the cliff face. It was partially buried in snow, with just the back of the jacket and one arm visible. From the top of the cliff, it looked exactly like a corpse that had tumbled down and gotten snagged on a root. Then, I planted the bait. I took an old smartphone, a burner I had bought for cash, and taped it securely to a rock right next to the mannequin's hand. I set the volume to maximum and queued up the audio file. Then, we retreated to the tree line, camouflaged in white hunting gear, and waited. Richard and Elena arrived just before sunset. We watched through binoculars as their Range Rover skidded to a halt on the logging road above the ravine. Richard got out first. He looked manic. His eyes were wide, darting around the forest. He was holding a shovel. Elena followed, shivering in a fur coat, looking miserable and frightened. "She isn't here." "Richard," Elena complained. "The sheriff searched this area." "The sheriff is an idiot!" Richard shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "She has to be here. I saw the drone footage again. There was a heat bloom here 2 nights ago. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe it was her dying breath. I don't care. I am finding her." He began to walk along the edge of the cliff, stabbing the shovel into the snowdrifts. "Maxine!" he screamed. "Come out, you useless cow! Where are you hiding?" It was pathetic. He was yelling at a ghost. I signaled Martha. She used a laser pointer to flash a brief, momentary glint on the snow near the mannequin, mimicking the reflection of a watch or jewelry. Richard caught the flash. "There." He ran to the edge. He peered down into the gloom of the ravine. "I see her," he breathed. "Oh, thank God. I see the jacket." "Where?" Elena asked, inching closer but staying well back from the edge. "Down there, on the ledge. She fell." Richard let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "She fell. It was an accident. It is perfect. Can you reach her?" "I have to," Richard said. "I need a photo. I need proof for the coroner so they come and get her." He didn't have a rope. He didn't have climbing gear. He was driven by desperation and the arrogance of a man who believes the universe bends to his will. He began to scramble down the icy slope. "Be careful," Elena called out, though her tone suggested she wouldn't be too upset if he fell. Richard slid, grabbing at roots and rocks. He was panting heavily, cursing as the snow soaked his expensive trousers. He reached the ledge. He was 5 feet away from the body. "I got you," he grunted. crawling toward the mannequin. "End of the line! Max!" He reached out and grabbed the shoulder of the windbreaker. He pulled. The mannequin was light. It rolled over stiffly, revealing the blank, plastic face and the missing eyes. Richard screamed. He recoiled, scrambling backward. "What is this?" He slipped. His boot hit a patch of black ice. His legs went out from under him. He slid toward the edge of the ledge, a 300-foot drop into the rocky creek bed below. He clawed at the snow, his fingernails tearing. He managed to grab a thick pine root jutting out of the cliff face just as his legs went over the edge. He hung there, dangling, his breath coming in short, terrified gasps. "Elena!" he screamed. "Help me!" But Elena was 40 feet up, and she couldn't see him. Then, the phone next to his hand started to play. It wasn't a ringtone. It was a voice. His voice. Audio. "Just make sure she doesn't talk to anyone. Jim, I am counting on you." Richard froze, hanging by one hand over the abyss. He looked at the rock next to him. The phone was there, the screen glowing in the twilight. Audio. "I watched you lock the door. I saw her face. I am an accessory to capital murder. Richard." Elena's voice from the recording I had made in the penthouse office. Audio. "She is dangerous. Elena, get back. She is having one of her episodes." The recording cycled, mixing his lies with his confessions. Richard stared at the plastic face of the mannequin. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't the police. This wasn't the mob. This wasn't a haunting. Someone had been in his office. Someone had recorded him. Someone had built this dummy and lured him to this exact spot. "Who are you?" he whispered to the surrounding trees. "Who is doing this?" From my vantage point in the tree line, I watched him dangle. I could have shot him. I could have let him fall. But that would have been too easy. I pressed the button on the remote starter for the drone I had parked in a nearby tree. The drone buzzed to life, its lights flashing red and blue, simulating police strobes. It rose into the air and hovered right in front of Richard's face. The speaker on the drone crackled. I spoke into the microphone on my headset, my voice distorted by a modulator to sound deep and mechanical. "Gravity is a bitch, isn't it? Richard?" Richard stared at the drone, his eyes bulging. "Maxine? You have 24 hours to confess," the drone voice said, "or the whole world hears what is on this playlist." Then, I flew the drone up and away, disappearing into the night. Richard hauled himself up onto the ledge, sobbing. He lay there in the snow next to the mannequin, defeated, terrified, and utterly exposed. He knew now. The game had changed. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the prey. And the woods were full of eyes. Paranoia is a parasite. It needs a host to survive. But eventually, it consumes the host entirely. After the incident at the ravine, Richard was no longer a functioning human being. He was a twitching bundle of nerves and terror. He refused to sleep. He paced the floor of the lodge, holding a fireplace poker, muttering about drones and ghosts. Elena, however, was not paranoid. She was pragmatic, and a pragmatic predator knows when the ship is sinking. From my surveillance station, I watched the fracture in their alliance turn into a gaping canyon. Elena sat in the kitchen, her back to Richard, typing furiously on her phone. She wasn't texting him. She was texting a number with a Washington, D.C. area code. I recognized the number. It belonged to a criminal defense attorney named Samuel Weiss, known for cutting immunity deals for high-profile informants. "She is flipping," Martha said, reading the keystroke logs scrolling on our monitor. "Look at that? She is asking about the timeline for a proffer session with the district attorney. She thinks she can trade Richard for her freedom," I said. "She wants to paint herself as the coerced victim, the poor secretary forced to participate in her boss's psychotic break." "Are you going to let her?" Martha asked. "Absolutely not," I replied. "They both go down, but first, they have to destroy each other." I opened a file I had extracted from Richard's cloud days ago. It was a folder titled Contingency, Operation Clean Sweep. Inside was a drafted statement for the police, written by Richard, but dated for 2 days from now. It detailed a narrative where he discovered Elena had been embezzling money and, in a fit of rage, had harmed his wife. It was his escape hatch, a plan to frame Elena for everything if the heat got too high. I attached the document to an email. I routed it through an anonymous server so it would look like it came from inside Richard's own legal team. Subject: FYI. He is selling you out. I hit send. On the screen, Elena's phone buzzed. She picked it up. I watched her posture stiffen. She read the document. Her face went pale, then flushed with a deep, violent crimson. She looked over her shoulder at Richard, who was staring out the window at the snow. She didn't scream. She didn't confront him. She just stood up, walked to the bathroom, and locked the door. Now for the other rat, I said. I turned my attention to Richard. He was vulnerable, scared, and looking for a savior. He kept calling Arthur Sterling, our family lawyer. He trusted Arthur. He thought Arthur was the one person who could fix the legal mess of the trust fund. What Richard didn't know, but I did, thanks to the synced photo stream on Elena's phone, was that Arthur and Elena had been sleeping together for 6 months. They were planning to take their cut of the Corbett fortune and run to the Cayman Islands, leaving Richard to deal with the fallout. I selected 3 photos, one of them kissing in a restaurant, one of a hotel receipt with both their names, and a screenshot of a text chain where Arthur called Richard a useful idiot. I sent them to Richard's iPad, which was sitting on the coffee table right in front of him. Ping. Richard glanced down. He swiped the screen. I watched his face transform. The fear evaporated, replaced by the cold, dead look of a shark that smells blood. He swiped again, and again. He looked at the bathroom door where Elena was hiding. He looked at the phone in his hand, the line to Arthur still open. "Arthur?" Richard said into the phone, his voice deceptively calm. "I am here, Richard." Arthur's voice came through the speaker. "I am working on the death certificate. We just need to hold tight. You are working hard, aren't you?" Richard said. "Is that why you billed me for a suite at the Four Seasons last month? The one you shared with my mistress?" There was a dead silence on the line. "Richard, I don't know what you are talking about." Arthur stammered. "You are fired," Richard said. "And Arthur, if you try to leave the state, I will forward these photos to your wife and to the Bar Association." He hung up. He stood up and walked toward the bathroom door. He didn't knock. He kicked it. "Open the door! Veronica!" he roared. Using her real name, the door flew open. Elena stood there, holding a hairbrush like a weapon. "You tried to frame me!" she screamed, waving her phone. "I saw the file. You were going to tell the police I did it." "You are sleeping with my lawyer," Richard bellowed back. "You two were plotting to cut me out." "Because you are a liability," Elena shouted. "Look at you. You are hallucinating. You are weak. I did what I had to do to protect the investment." "I am the investment." Richard grabbed her by the shoulders. "I am the genius who built this. You are nothing but a grifter I picked up from a gutter." They were tearing each other apart. The alliance was shattered. There was no trust left, only survival instinct. "Let them fight," I whispered. "Now, cut the oxygen." It was time to hit them where it actually hurt. Not their hearts, but their wallets. I opened the secure terminal on my laptop. The Corbett Family Trust was not just a bank account. It was a fortress protected by multi-layered security protocols. However, as the primary beneficiary, I possessed the master biometric keys. Richard had the power of attorney, but I had the founder's override. A failsafe my father had built into the system. Designed to freeze everything in case of a hostile corporate takeover, it required a blockchain authentication key that only existed on a hard drive I had buried in the backyard of our Seattle home 5 years ago. Martha had dug it up for me yesterday. I inserted the drive. The code streamed across the screen. Initiating protocol. Red freeze. Reason: internal fraud / suspicious activity. Authorization: Maxine Corbett. Live biometric verification. I scanned my thumbprint on the external reader. Access granted. Status: all assets frozen. All credit lines suspended. Global fraud alert. Active. I sat back. It is done. Every penny they have access to is now locked in a digital vault that requires a federal court order to open. And since I am the one who locked it, they can't unlock it without me. The effect was immediate. On the screen, Richard's phone rang. It was the private wealth manager at the bank. Richard put it on speaker, his hands shaking. "Mr. Corbett, we have a problem," the banker said, sounding panicked. "The system just locked us out. All accounts, the trust, the operating capital, even your personal checking. It has been flagged for a level 5 security breach." "What?" Richard screamed. "Fix it!" "I have transfers pending." "I can't," the banker said. "This override came from the root user. It came from Maxine Corbett's authorization key." Richard dropped the phone. He stared at it as if it were a bomb. "She is dead," he whispered. "She is dead. How is she doing this?" "She is not dead," Elena yelled. "Or someone has her codes. We need to leave. Richard, we need to go now. The jet is waiting at the airfield." "We can't," Richard whispered. "If the accounts are frozen, the fuel cards won't work. We can't pay the pilots." "I have cash," Elena said, grabbing her purse. "I have $10,000 in the safe. Let's go." They scrambled to pack. Throwing clothes into bags, abandoning the lodge, they piled into the Range Rover and sped off toward the town. "Follow them on the traffic cams," I told Martha. "I want to see this." 30 minutes later, Richard and Elena pulled into a gas station on the main highway. The Rover was running on fumes. Richard jumped out and swiped his Platinum American Express card at the pump. Beep. Declined. He swiped it again. Declined. He pulled out another card. A black card. Declined. He ran inside the station. I watched through the store's security camera feed. He threw 5 credit cards on the counter. "Just run them," he screamed at the teenage clerk. "I am Richard Corbett. I have millions of dollars." The clerk looked bored. He ran the first card. "Sorry, dude. Says pickup card. Fraud. I have to keep this." "You can't keep it." Richard lunged over the counter. Elena ran in. Pulling him back, she threw a handful of cash on the counter, her secret stash. "Just take the cash. Put $50 in the tank." They were reduced to counting bills like petty criminals. The kings and queens of Seattle were suddenly just 2 desperate people trying to buy enough gas to outrun their shadows. "They are running out of options," Martha said. "But we have one loose end." "Sheriff Miller," I said. The sheriff had gone quiet. He wasn't answering Richard's calls. He knew the wind was changing. He was trying to erase his tracks, probably shredding files at the station right now. "He is trying to bail," Martha said, standing up and grabbing her coat. "I am going to have a little chat with him." "Be careful," I said. "He is armed." "So am I," Martha said, patting the file folder tucked into her jacket. "With the truth." Martha intercepted Sheriff Miller on a lonely stretch of County Road 9. He was driving his personal truck, the bed loaded with camping gear. He was running. Martha parked the van across the road, blocking both lanes. Miller slammed on his brakes, skidding to a halt. He got out, his hand on his holster. "Move the vehicle," he shouted. "This is official police business." Martha stepped out into the headlights. She didn't flinch. She held up a manila envelope. "Going fishing, Jim?" she called out. "Or just hoping to disappear before the FBI gets here?" "Who are you?" Miller drew his gun. "Get on the ground." "I am the ghost of Christmas past," Martha said calmly. "And in this envelope, I have copies of the wire transfers Richard Corbett sent to your offshore account in Belize. $50,000 2 days ago. Another $50,000 scheduled for next week. Consulting fees, right?" Miller froze. The gun wavered. "I also have the audio recording of you and Richard joking about neutralizing the threat," Martha continued. Taking a step forward, "Maxine Corbett recorded everything. Jim, the cloud doesn't forget." "She is dead," Miller stammered. "Is she?" Martha smiled. Then who sent these files to the state attorney general 5 minutes ago? Oh, wait, I haven't hit send yet. I was waiting to see if you wanted to keep your pension. Miller lowered the gun. He looked at the envelope, then at the dark road behind him. He realized he was trapped. If he ran, he was a fugitive. If he shot Martha, the files would go out anyway. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice defeated. "I want you to do your job." Martha said, "I want you to turn that truck around. I want you to go back to the station, and I want you to open a formal investigation into the attempted murder of Maxine Corbett." "Richard will kill me," Miller said. "Richard can't even buy a gallon of gas right now," Martha said. "He is finished. You can go down with him as an accomplice, or you can be the hero cop who uncovered the plot. You can turn state's evidence, immunity for your testimony. It is a limited-time offer. Jim?" Miller stood there for a long minute, the cold wind whipping his coat. He looked at the gun in his hand, then holstered it. "I need that envelope," he said. "You get a copy," Martha said. "The original stays with me until Richard is in handcuffs. Deal?" Miller nodded slowly. "Deal." "Good," Martha said, moving the van. "Better hurry. Sheriff, I hear there is a suspect fleeing southbound on Highway 93. Back in the motel room, I watched the dominoes fall. The sheriff's cruiser turned around, lights flashing. He wasn't running anymore. He was hunting. Richard and Elena were in the car, fighting, broke, and paranoid. Their money was gone. Their lawyer was compromised. Their pet cop had just switched sides. I picked up my phone. I had one more message to send. This one wasn't to Richard or Elena. It was to the public. I logged into my social media accounts. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I hadn't posted in weeks. I uploaded a single image. It was a photo of the view from the cliff where Richard had tried to kill me. The snow was pristine, white, and beautiful. The caption read, "The cold preserves everything, even the truth. See you soon." I hit post. Within seconds, the notifications exploded. Likes, comments, shares. The world saw that Maxine Corbett was online. The ghost had officially returned. The date on my watch read February 3rd. It was my 33rd birthday, in a different life, the one I had lived 5 days ago. This day would have been celebrated with a champagne brunch at the country club, a bouquet of white roses from Richard, and a carefully staged Instagram post about gratitude. In that life, I would have signed a stack of documents I did not read, handing over the keys to my inheritance to a husband who secretly despised me. But that life was dead. It lay frozen at the bottom of a ravine in Montana. Today, I was celebrating differently. I stood in the corridor of the grandest office building in Seattle, staring at the double mahogany doors of the conference room at the end of the hall. I was not wearing the ragged, oversized clothes of a survivor. I was wearing a bespoke white wool suit, tailored to sharp, terrifying perfection. My hair, the jagged black crop I had hacked off in the bunker, was styled back, severe and modern. I wore no jewelry except for a single, heavy platinum watch. Beside me stood Martha. She was unrecognizable. The homeless veteran in the camouflage jacket was gone. In her place stood a formidable woman in a charcoal gray power suit, her gray hair pulled into a neat chignon, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She looked exactly like what she was, a senior advisor who had built skyscrapers and survived wars. Behind us was a phalanx of silent professionals, 6 federal agents in windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in yellow on the back, 2 forensic accountants, and my new legal counsel, a shark named Eleanor Vance. No relation, just a happy coincidence, who specialized in asset recovery and high crimes litigation. "They are in there," Martha said, her voice low and steady. "I tapped the room audio 5 minutes ago. Listen." She handed me an earpiece. I pressed it to my ear. The voices were muffled but distinct. "It is a forgery. Richard," a man's voice hissed. That would be their new lawyer. A disbarred ambulance chaser named Garrick they had scraped up from the bottom of the barrel after Arthur Sterling had been compromised. "The ink is barely dry. This death certificate lists the cause of death as accidental exposure and is signed by a coroner in a county that doesn't even exist. Just file it. Richard's voice was a high-pitched screech of desperation. The bank doesn't check the geography. They just need a paper trail to unlock the initial tranche of funds. I need $5 million by noon. Garrick, do you understand? Noon, or we are all dead. I am not going to jail for this, Garrick argued. You are already going to jail if they find out about the money laundering you helped Elena with in Nevada, Richard shouted. We are in this together. Now stamp the damn form and fax it to the trust administrator. Richard, stop yelling, Elena's voice cut in. She sounded frayed, on the edge of hysteria. You are making him nervous. Just give him the cash. We have $10,000 left. That is our getaway money, Richard snapped. There is no getaway if we don't get the trust fund, Elena screamed back. Sign the paper, Garrick, or I swear to God I will tell the feds about your offshore accounts too. I took the earpiece out. A cold, calm smile spread across my face. They were eating each other alive. Ready? Martha asked. Let's blow out the candles, I said. I signaled to the lead FBI agent. He nodded. I walked to the double doors. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I placed both hands on the brass handles and threw them open with enough force that they slammed against the interior walls with a thunderous crash. The room froze. Richard was standing at the head of the table, his face red, his tie undone, holding a fake death certificate like a shield. Elena was sitting to his right, clutching her purse. Garrick was hovering over a fax machine. They all turned, for 3 seconds. There was no sound in the room except the hum of the air conditioning. Their brains could not process the data. They were looking at a ghost. They were looking at the woman they had mourned on television, the woman they had murdered in their minds, the woman whose death was the cornerstone of their entire future. I stepped into the room. The click of my heels on the hardwood floor was sharp and deliberate. I heard you were looking for me, I said. My voice was ice. It was the wind that howled through the bunker. It was the silence of the snow. Richard dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor. Landing face up. Certificate of death. Maxine Corbett. Maxine, he whispered. His legs gave out. He didn't fall. He just crumpled into his chair. His eyes bulging, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Elena was faster. The fight-or-flight instinct kicked in. She scrambled out of her chair, knocking it over, and bolted toward the side exit door near the window. I wouldn't do that, Martha said, stepping into the room behind me. Elena stopped dead. She looked at Martha, then at the 6 federal agents pouring into the room, their weapons drawn but pointed low. Federal agents, the lead agent announced, his voice booming. Nobody moves. Hands where I can see them. Elena backed up against the wall, her chest heaving. I didn't do it. It was him. I am a victim here. Sit down, Veronica, I said. Using her real name, the use of it made her flinch as if I had slapped her. The show is over. I walked to the head of the table. Richard looked up at me. He was trembling so violently his teeth were audible. He looked at my face, searching for the soft, pliable wife he had known. He found only the executioner. You are dead, he mumbled, his mind snapping. I saw you fall. I saw the body. The mannequin. The phone. You saw what you wanted to see. Richard, I said. You were wrong on both counts. I signaled to Martha. She placed a laptop on the conference table and connected it to the large projection screen on the wall. You plan to file this, I said, addressing the room while locking eyes with Richard. So let's examine the evidence of what really happened. Martha hit a key. We saw the look on his face, not panic, not sorrow, but cold, hard determination. And then, the audio played. The wind was loud, but his voice was clear. Audio. Just make sure she doesn't talk to anyone. Jim, I am counting on you. The video cut to the window scene. Richard and Elena hugging, laughing, Elena checking her phone while my husband watched his wife freeze to death. This, I said, pointing at the screen, is Exhibit A in your trial for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. Richard was weeping now, ugly, snot-nosed sobs. Maxine, please. It was a mistake. I was stressed. The business, the debts, I didn't know what I was doing. Oh, but you did, I said. You knew exactly what you were doing. Just like you knew what you were doing when you set up the shell companies. Martha clicked the next slide. A complex web of financial transactions appeared. It showed the flow of money from Apex Horizon into accounts controlled by Elena, and then into the crypto wallets of the Volkov crime syndicate. This is Exhibit B, I continued. Money laundering, embezzlement, wire fraud. You weren't just killing me for the inheritance. Richard, you were using my family's company to wash money for the mob. That makes this a RICO case. That means federal prison, no parole, no country club jail. Garrick, the lawyer, tried to slide toward the door. I had nothing to do with this. I was just hired today. Sit down. Garrick, Agent Ross barked. We have your signature on the forged documents. You are going away for a long time, too. I turned back to Richard. He had slid out of his chair and was now on his knees. He reached out to grab the hem of my white trousers. I stepped back. I would not let him touch me. Not ever again. Maxine, baby, he pleaded, tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive tan. I love you. You know I love you. She made me do it. Elena, she is a witch. She drugged me. She told me you were cheating. She threatened to kill me if I didn't help her. I am the victim. Max, I saved you. I sent you to the shed because I thought you would be safe there. You liar! Elena shrieked from the wall. She lunged at him, her fingernails aimed at his eyes. An agent grabbed her, restraining her arms. He planned it all. He hired me. He has been planning to kill you for 3 years. He promised me half the money. Look at the emails. I have the emails. He is the devil, Elena screamed, struggling against the cuffs, clicking onto her wrists. He sold your house. He sold your father's legacy to the Chinese while you were still warm. Enough, I said. My voice silenced the room. I looked down at Richard. He was pathetic. A man who had once commanded boardrooms was now a groveling heap on the floor, selling out his partner, selling out his dignity, begging for a mercy he had never shown anyone. You violated the unworthy heir doctrine, I said, citing the statute my new lawyer had prepped me on, by attempting to cause my death. You forfeit any and all claim to my estate. The prenuptial agreement is voided by your criminal conduct. You get nothing. Richard, not a penny. I leaned in closer. And the debts? The $8 million you owe Volkov? That is still your debt. The company isn't paying it. The trust isn't paying it. It is all on you. Richard's face went white. He knew what that meant. Prison would be the safest place for him, and even there, he wouldn't be safe. FBI, you are under arrest, Agent Ross announced. 2 agents hauled Richard to his feet. He was dead weight. He looked at me one last time, his eyes hollow. Maxine, he whispered, I am your husband. No, I said, turning my back on him. You are just a bad investment I finally wrote off. They dragged him out. I listened to his wails fade down the hallway, followed by Elena's screaming curses. The room was suddenly quiet. Martha walked over and closed the laptop. She looked at me and nodded. It was a nod of respect. A soldier acknowledging a general. Happy birthday, Maxine, she said softly. I looked at the empty chairs, the discarded fake death certificate, and the view of the city skyline outside the window, a city that was finally, truly mine. Best birthday ever, I replied. But I wasn't done. The law would take care of their bodies. I had to ensure the destruction of their reputations. I had to burn the memory of them so thoroughly that nothing could ever grow from the ashes. Agent Ross, I said, is the press conference set up? Yes, ma'am, the agent replied. They are waiting in the lobby. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, everyone is there. Good. I straightened my jacket. Let's go tell them a story. The sight of Richard Corbett in handcuffs was not just justice, it was art. As the federal agents escorted him and Elena out of the office building and into the waiting chaos of the lobby, I stood on the mezzanine level. Looking down, the press had gathered in a swarm, a sea of flashing lights and shouting voices. They had been tipped off. Of course, Martha had leaked the location of the arrest 20 minutes before we even breached the conference room. Richard tried to cover his face with his jacket. Shying away from the cameras he used to court so desperately, he looked small. The titan of industry, the man who had thrown me into a blizzard to secure his empire, was now being shoved into the back of a black SUV like a common shoplifter. Elena was less dignified. She was screaming, her face twisted into a mask of feral rage, spitting at a cameraman who got too close. The mask of the grieving friend had slipped, revealing the cornered rat beneath. "It is done," Martha said, standing beside me, her arms crossed. "No," I corrected, turning away from the spectacle. "The arrest is just the opening ceremony. Now comes the dissection." We went back to the conference room where Eleanor Vance and her team of forensic accountants were already dissecting the corpse of Richard's financial life. The law would take his freedom, but I was going to take his soul. "Talk to me about the Slayer statute," I said, sitting at the head of the table. Eleanor slid a thick file across the mahogany surface. In Washington state, as in most jurisdictions, it is formally known as the unworthy heir doctrine. It is quite simple. Maxine, a person who participates in the willful and unlawful killing, or attempted killing, of a decedent, cannot acquire any property or benefit from the death of said decedent. "Does it apply to the prenuptial agreement?" I asked. "It applies to everything," Eleanor said, a shark-like grin appearing on her face. "The prenup is voidable on the grounds of fraud and criminal intent. But we are going further, because he used company funds to facilitate the crime, paying Elena, buying the drone, fueling the jet. We are piercing the corporate veil. Meaning Richard is personally liable for the debts of Apex Horizon," Eleanor explained. "We are triggering the bad actor clauses in his business loans. The bank is calling in the notes. Today, I picked up the file. It was a death warrant for his legacy. He owes the Volkov syndicate $8 million, I said, and he owes the bank another $12 million in leverage loans. The bank will seize his personal assets first," Eleanor said. "The penthouse, the cars, the watch collection, the art, it is all being frozen as we speak. By the time he makes bail, if he makes bail, he won't have a place to sleep." "And the Volkovs?" I asked. Martha chimed in from the corner. "The Volkovs don't file lawsuits. Maxine, they settle accounts. When word gets out that Richard is broke and talking to the feds to save his own skin, he is a walking target. He is safer in solitary confinement than he is on the street." "Good," I said. "Let him rot in debt." The destruction of Elena was even more absolute. The fingerprints taken at booking matched the database hits I had found. Elena was officially dead. Veronica Miller was resurrected, and she was a monster. Within 24 hours, the news cycle had shifted from the miracle survivor story to the Black Widow expose. My legal team quietly released the dossier on Veronica's past to the victims' families in Nevada and Florida. The reaction was a landslide. Civil suits were filed before the sun went down. The family of her first husband, the man who had vanished in the desert, successfully petitioned to reopen the homicide investigation based on the new pattern of evidence I had provided. I watched the news report from my hotel suite that evening. The district attorney was giving a press conference. "We are looking at multiple life sentences," the DA announced, looking grim. "Ms. Miller is a flight risk and a danger to the community. We are denying bail. Furthermore, we are investigating her involvement in 3 other suspicious deaths linked to insurance payouts." Veronica would never see the outside of a prison cell again. She would grow old in a concrete box, stripped of her beauty, her schemes, and her name. She was just inmate number 8,940 now. And then there was the sheriff. Sheriff Miller didn't even make it to the arraignment. He surrendered his badge and his service weapon the moment the FBI rolled into his station. Martha's leverage had been absolute, to save his pension for his wife. He pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and accepted a 5-year sentence in a minimum security federal camp. He sang like a bird, corroborating every detail of Richard's plot, sealing the coffin on my husband's defense. But legal victory wasn't enough. I needed the world to see Richard for what he was. I agreed to a single, exclusive interview with Primetime Investigates. The interview aired 3 days later. I sat in a chair, wearing the same simple black turtleneck I had worn in the bunker. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for sympathy. I looked directly into the camera lens, knowing Richard was watching from the day room of the county jail. "He didn't just try to kill me," I told the interviewer, my voice steady. "He tried to erase me. He sold my home before I was even reported missing. He laughed while I froze. Richard Corbett isn't a businessman. He is a parasite. He built a facade of success on the backs of women he thought were too weak to fight back. He was wrong." The court of public opinion delivered its verdict instantly. Apex Horizons' stock price didn't just drop, it evaporated. The board of directors voted unanimously to remove Richard as CEO and scrub his name from the company history. His college revoked his honorary degree. The charity boards he sat on issued statements condemning him. He was not just a criminal, he was a pariah, a joke. The man who got outsmarted by his trophy wife. That humiliation, I knew, hurt him more than the prison sentence ever could. A week later, I went to see him. The King County Jail is a bleak, gray fortress. It smells of industrial cleaner, stale sweat, and despair. I walked through the security checkpoints, my heels clicking on the linoleum, the sound echoing like gunfire. I stood on the visiting side of the thick plexiglass. They brought him in. He looked 10 years older. His hair, usually dyed and coiffed, was gray at the roots and greasy. His face was unshaven. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. He looked like a man whose internal architecture had collapsed. He sat down and picked up the phone. His hands were shaking. I picked up the receiver on my side. "Maxine," he croaked. His voice was a wreck. "Maxine, thank God you came." I said nothing. I just looked at him. I studied him like a biologist studying a specimen under a microscope. "You have to help me," he began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The lawyer, the public defender, he is an idiot. He says I am looking at 20 years. 20 years. Max, I can't do 20 years. I will die in here." "That is the point, Richard," I said calmly. "No, listen to me." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the glass. "We can fix this. I can testify against Elena. I can say she forced me. I can say I was mentally incompetent. But I need money for a real defense team. I need you to unlock the accounts. Just a little, just enough for a retainer." "The accounts are gone," I said. "The bank took the penthouse this morning. Your Ferrari was auctioned yesterday. You are bankrupt. Richard, you don't have a penny to your name." He flinched. "Then use your money, the trust. We are still married." "You owe me that much. I am your husband." "My husband died in the blizzard," I said. "The man sitting in front of me is just a stranger who owes me a life." "Don't be like this," he pleaded, tears welling up in his bloodshot eyes. "Remember the good times? Remember Paris? Remember our wedding? I loved you, Max, in my own way. I loved you. We were a team. We were the Corbetts. You can't just throw me away." "You threw me away," I said, my voice hardening. "You dragged me out of our home and locked the door. You left me in negative 20-degree weather to die alone in the dark. You didn't care about Paris then. You only cared about the payout." "I made a mistake," he sobbed. "I am sorry. I am begging you. Please. I have nobody else. The Volkov sent word. They are going to get to me in here. Maxine, they are going to kill me. You have to save me." I looked at him. I looked at the terror in his eyes. It was the same terror I had felt when the cold started to shut down my organs. It was the same helplessness. He was finally feeling it. The cold. I stood up. "Where are you going?" he panicked, slamming his hand against the glass. "Don't leave. Maxine, don't you dare walk away." I leaned close to the glass, my breath fogging it slightly. "Do you remember what you said to the sheriff?" I asked softly. "Just make sure she doesn't talk to anyone. I am counting on you." He froze. "I am counting on the system now." "Richard," I said. "I am counting on the Volkovs. I am counting on the other inmates who don't like wife killers." "Maxine, please." "You threw me into a blizzard to find your fortune," I said, delivering the words with the weight of a final judgment. "Now, I am leaving you in the middle of your own storm. But this time, Richard, there is no Shed, there is no Martha, and no one is coming to save you." I hung up the phone. He was screaming something, his mouth moving frantically, his fists pounding on the reinforced glass, but I couldn't hear him. The line was dead. I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit. I didn't look back. The sound of the heavy steel door buzzing open was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I walked out of the jail and into the bright, crisp afternoon. The air was cool, but it didn't bite. It felt fresh. It felt clean. Martha was waiting for me by the car, leaning against the hood, wearing sunglasses. "How was it?" she asked. "Cold," I said, smiling. "But necessary. Ready to go home?" "No," I said, looking up at the sky where the sun was breaking through the clouds. "I don't have a home anymore. I sold the penthouse." "So where to?" "To the lawyer's office," I said, opening the car door. "We have a foundation to start, and I have a lot of money to give away." Richard Corbett was in a cage, but for the first time in 5 years, Maxine Vance was free. 6 months is a lifetime when you measure it by the seasons of the mountains. Spring had finally arrived in Montana, and it had arrived with a vengeance. It did not creep in. It burst forth, the snow that had once been a shroud, burying the world in white silence, was gone. In its place, the valley was a riot of wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, lupine, and glacier lilies pushing through the thawing earth. The air no longer tasted of ice and death. It smelled of damp soil, pine resin, and the sweet, impossible scent of new life. I stood on the expansive redwood deck of the new building. Gripping the railing, the wood was warm under my palms, heated by a sun that felt benevolent for the first time in years. Below me, the valley stretched out like a green canvas, alive with the sound of rushing water from the creek, the same creek where Richard had once dangled over the abyss. But the terror of that night felt distant now, like a nightmare remembered upon waking in a safe, sunlit room. I was no longer the woman who had shivered in a thin windbreaker, waiting to die. That Maxine was gone, buried with the winter. The woman standing on the deck wore a structured linen blazer and jeans, practical and strong. My hair had grown out slightly, but I kept it short, a reminder of the night I cut away my vanity to survive. Behind me, the sound of laughter drifted through the open glass doors. The hearth, that was what we named it. It wasn't a shelter. I hated that word. Shelters were temporary. They were places you went to hide. This was a center for restoration. It was a place where women who had been discarded by society, veterans, victims of domestic violence, the invisible people like Martha had been, could find their footing again. I had sold the lodge. I couldn't bear to step foot in that mausoleum of lies again. I sold it to a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley for a sum that was obscene, and I took every single dollar of that sale, combined it with the dividends from the Corbett Trust, and poured it into this land. We built the hearth on the southern slope of the ridge, where the sun hit first in the morning and lingered longest in the evening. "Ms. Corbett?" I turned. Sarah, a young woman we had taken in 3 months ago, stood in the doorway. When she arrived, she had been mute with trauma, hiding under a hood. Now, she was our lead intake coordinator, her face bright and open. "I told you, Sarah," I smiled. "It is just Maxine. Right. Maxine, she grinned. Mrs. Martha is looking for you. She is in the main office. She says the contractor is trying to overcharge us for the solar panel installation, and she is about to go full drill sergeant on him. I laughed. It was a genuine sound, bubbling up from my chest without restriction. I better get in there before she makes him cry. We need those panels. I walked inside. The main hall of the hearth was flooded with light. There was a massive stone fireplace in the center, the literal hearth, where a fire crackled day and night, not for warmth anymore, but as a symbol, a promise that the cold would never win again. I found Martha in the office. She was sitting behind a large oak desk, the phone pressed to her ear, a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked magnificent. The camouflage jacket was gone, replaced by a smart navy cardigan and slacks. Her gray hair was styled in a neat bob. She looked like a CEO, a grandmother, and a general all rolled into one. "Listen to me, son," Martha was saying into the phone, her voice calm but laced with steel. "I know the difference between kilowatt hours and a hole in the ground. I was an engineer before you were born. If that invoice isn't corrected by close of business, I will come down there and audit your entire supply chain myself. Do we understand each other?" She paused, listening, then nodded. "Good decision. Have a nice day." She hung up and winked at me. "He is knocking 15% off. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Mrs. Martha," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "You are already on my good side, boss," she chuckled, stacking a pile of files. "How is the view?" "Green," I said. "Unbelievably green." "It happens every year," Martha said, her eyes softening. "We just forget to look." Martha had flourished here. This place gave her back what Richard had stolen. Her purpose. She wasn't just managing the facility. She was the heart of it. She taught the engineering workshops. She led the survival skills classes. She was the proof that you could be broken by the world and put yourself back together stronger than before. "Oh," Martha said, opening a drawer. The mail came. This was in the stack. She slid a single envelope across the desk. I recognized the return address instantly. It was stamped in red ink. Washington State Penitentiary, inmate mail. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. Richard Corbett. I stared at the envelope. It looked harmless, just a piece of paper. But inside, I knew what I would find. Pleas, manipulations, the frantic scratching of a man who realized too late that he was not the protagonist of the universe. 6 months ago, seeing this would have made my heart race. I would have felt fear, or anger, or a vindictive need to read his suffering. Now, I felt nothing. It was just paper. "Do you want to open it?" Martha asked quietly. I picked up the envelope. I felt the texture of it, the cheap pulp. I thought about Richard sitting in his cell, probably telling anyone who would listen that he was a victim, that he used to be a king. I thought about the winter night he locked the door. He was still locked in that winter. I was in the spring. "No," I said. "I don't think I do." I walked out of the office, carrying the letter, and went back into the main hall. I approached the massive stone fireplace. The flames were dancing, orange and yellow, lively and warm. I didn't hesitate. I tossed the unopened envelope into the center of the fire. For a second, it sat on the logs, white and stark against the soot. Then, the edges curled, the paper browned, a flame licked the corner, and then, with a soft whoosh, it caught. I watched Richard's name turn to ash. I watched his words, whatever they were, disintegrate into smoke that drifted up the chimney and out into the vast, open sky. It was over. Genuinely, truly over. The silence he had tried to force upon me was now my peace. The erasure he had planned for me had become my clean slate. I walked back out to the deck. Martha had followed me. She stood beside me, watching the last wisp of smoke dissipate into the blue air. She handed me a mug of hot tea. "You didn't read it. There is nothing he can tell me that I need to know," I said. wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. He belongs to the cold. Martha, I don't live there anymore. We stood in silence for a long moment, listening to the wind rustling through the new leaves of the aspen trees. It wasn't a hostile wind anymore. It was a gentle breeze, carrying the promise of summer. I looked out at the horizon, where the jagged peaks of the mountains cut into the sky. They were still formidable, still dangerous, but they were also beautiful. I had climbed my mountain. I had survived the avalanche. I wasn't just the survivor of a crime. I was the architect of a new reality. I had taken the wreckage of my life and built a sanctuary. I had taken the fear and turned it into power. I looked at Martha. Her face, once etched with the grime of hopelessness, was now glowing with the quiet dignity of a woman who knows exactly who she is. I smiled, and this time, the smile reached all the way to my eyes. "It is warm today," I said softly. Martha took a sip of her tea, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she looked at me with pride. "Because we have made it through the winter, kid," she replied. I looked back at the fire burning in the hearth through the glass doors, then out to the endless, open sky. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, clean air of Montana. I was warm, I was safe, and for the first time in my life, I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story of survival and retribution. It has been a journey through the cold and into the light, and I hope Maxine's victory brought you a sense of justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a bustling city, a quiet countryside, or somewhere in between? Please leave a comment below and share your location and your thoughts on Richard's fate. Did he get what he deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Sweet Rose Drama. Give this video a like, and smash that hype button so we can share this warmth with even more listeners. Your support means the world to us. Stay safe, stay warm, and see you in the next story.